I will introduce the session with the vision of what community AMA, what's the goal and why did we start to do that, how it was 2 weeks ago and how is it going to be moving forward. So our mission at Plato is always have been to try to learn from the best engineering and product leaders that we know. And we wanted to reward the best mentors in the platform. For those who don't know, Plato is a community where people are helping each other on engineering and product leadership challenges. It can go anywhere from how to provide negative feedback, how to hire engineers, how to deal with difficult management situations, how to create a product roadmap, like all the challenges that you are facing when you are an engineering and product leader. And there are many people, great leaders in the world who already face those challenges. So we try with many different formats to spread this knowledge because we have an opportunity to learn from each other. So we have one-on-one session, small group setting sessions. We have those type of community AMA too. And those community AMA, the principle is that we are going to invite every other week one great engineering or product leader that we admire and we want to learn more from. And we are going to give the opportunity to other mentors to interview that person. So hopefully it will be beneficial for everyone. So 2 weeks ago, we had Luc Vincent, who gave us some great tips on how to set goals for your engineering team. This week, we have Tom. Tom is someone I met about a year ago. He's been so amazing in terms of giving me and us advice. Now he is a partner at Venrock. He is on the investment side, but before that, he has a really amazing career as a product and engineering leader. He's been a VP product at Netflix in the early day of Netflix. He's been the CPO of Coursera, leading all the engineering and product team. He has learned a lot, and one of the topics he likes very much is how to motivate your engineering and product team. And Fabrice and Justin are two of the best mentor in the platform, given the data we have. They consistently receive really great grades from the mentees. They constantly receive really great grades from the mentees. They constantly have some good one-on-one and good sessions. So we give them the opportunity to interview Tom, and hopefully it's going to be beneficial for all of you. So Fabrice, Justin, do you want to introduce yourself really quick, and then we can get started?
Okay,
sure,
thank you.
That's good.
Go
ahead.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Fabrice. I'm from Paris, and it's a great pleasure to be here interviewing Tom with Justin. I've been previously a VP of Engineering of Aircall, which is a startup. We're doing a cloud-based phone system for companies, and I scaled from 10 to 40 engineers in 15 months. And next step is scaling, so I had lots of questions to ask to Tom for this next level of scale.
Great, thanks, Fabrice. I'm Justin. I am a senior engineering manager at Airbnb. I'm actually based up in Portland, Oregon. I've been with Airbnb for about 2.5 years now and manage a couple teams working on our internal support tooling and support products.
And everyone, please use the feature Q&A at the bottom. You can see a button named Q&A if you have questions. Throughout the conversation, we are going to take all the questions. So we are together for the next 40, 45 minutes, 50 minutes maybe. So about half of the time, maybe a bit more, it would be mainly Fabrice and Justin leading the way, and asking questions. And for the last 15 minutes or so, we'll take questions that are listed here. And Fabrice and Justin will also lead that part, asking the questions that came from you all. So please do not hesitate to use this great feature from Zoom. So I'll let you now talk and learn as much as you can from Tom and Justin, Fabrice. I will let you the stage.
All right, thanks. Is Tom here? I can't see him.
Oh, I think he is joining from his laptop, so he's
okay. Perfect.
Yeah, in a couple of minutes. Yeah. So maybe in the meantime, Fabrice, Justin, like, can you let us know why you were interested about this topic? Why did it resonate with you? Why do you think it's an important topic?
Yeah, sure. This is a question I always ask myself with my teams when we move from small engineers history teams to more engineers. There's lots of questions about, okay, how could we moving forward with new people, how could we keep this engineering culture all together? And there are many questions that I first on my engineer asked me. And in the vision, I think it's very important to be very clear about why we want to scale, how we want to scale, and why it's a great opportunity for engineers. And there are different levels of scale, and I think it's always a recurring topic with another solutions, and well, that's it. So it's always up to date.
Yeah, for me, I think motivation goes right alongside with talent. I think we all sort of look to create interview pipelines so that we are recruiting and retaining the best talents and screening for the best talent. But we don't necessarily put the same energy into finding and encouraging motivation. And it's motivation, especially over the long term, that makes a talented engineer a highly productive engineer. It's that sort of intersection between talent and motivation. So I think focusing on how we can motivate our engineering and product teams, especially at 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, through scaling, through hypergrowth, is a major part of differentiating successful companies from those that aren't.
Great, cool. I'll let you Tom is back, and yeah, I will let the two of you have a discussion. I see you later.
Thanks. Hey, welcome back, Tom.
Hey, sorry guys. I was caught in some traffic, and then I was trying to move between my laptop and my phone, and complications. So
well, no worries.
I appreciate the patience.
You're fashionably late, so it's great. Can you just start with telling us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I'm 1 year in as an investor at Venrock. I focus on consumer investments and some scalable enterprise SaaS investments where I feel like they're going to really touch a lot of employees and be able to impact their lives. Prior to this, I was Chief Product Officer at Coursera. I helped Coursera scale from 50 people to 300, from really one business line to 3, and from about $1 million in revenue to about $100 million in revenue. And during that time, my team grew from probably 10 people to 160 people. So I went from being an individual manager to a manager of managers to like a leader of a large team. And a big part of what I felt like I learned through that was how important motivation, setting a vision, and really helping people understand where they're going is to the job. So that was pretty amazing. And then prior to that, I was VP of product at Netflix. When I started at Netflix, we were shipping DVDs around the US and with an aspiration of being global streaming. And at that time, we didn't really think we were going to do originals. And when I left, we were global streaming and doing originals. So it was a complete remake of the product, the content, the culture, like everything changed. And then prior to that, I spent 7 years working in advertising. So in total, 17 years of operating and 1 year of venture experience.
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you. That's very interesting. You're talking about vision, explaining vision to engineers or product teams where you want to go. Could you tell us more about how did you do that, and yes, how, and what was some questions from your teams about the scale, and how did you achieve to convince them?
Yeah, from my journey on vision was somewhat painful because I came from Netflix, and Netflix was sort of famous for being extremely focused. So I never had Reed set out like what's the 10-year vision for the company in really super explicit terms. It was always clear that we weren't a DVD company and we were going to move to streaming. So in that sense, there was a vision, but Reed never got into the weeds and said, here's the product vision that I'm looking for, and here's how I want it to be different, et cetera, et cetera. We were much more of a experimental test and try things, see what works, and follow the data. So I kind of took that approach and mapped it over to Coursera. And we built a very large A/B testing engine. We were doing 500 A/B tests a year. And I had some folks on my team coming up and saying, hey, Tom, we need a vision. And for a while, I would just say, like, that's dumb. No one can predict the future. We have our plan for the next 3 months or 6 months. Let's go experiment and see what works and follow the empirical evidence. And, you know, they'd go away probably frustrated. And then they'd come back a week later, it'd be someone else. And they'd say, hey, Tom, we really need a vision. And it just kept coming and kept coming. And like the team kept patiently prodding me that we needed a vision. And I realized after enough of this that actually I'm the one who's being dumb. And the vision isn't about predicting exactly what the future is going to look like. But the vision is here's how I interpreted what people were saying to me, which is I was coming at it from a very rational perspective. I was like, here are the metrics we have to hit. Here are the tests we're going to do. We'll see if they work. We see if they don't work. If they do work, we'll roll that out. If it doesn't work, we won't. And what people were saying was like, they weren't connecting. They understood it in their head, but they weren't connecting with their heart. And most of what I've learned that I think we do and what gets people really excited about their work is when they really feel it, when they really feel like they can connect what they're doing to some larger purpose and a larger mission and vision. So I said, okay, I got to figure this out. I got to figure out how to actually go and set a vision for Coursera. It's a new skill. It's something now. So I went from like rejecting it to embracing it. That's kind of step one. You have to agree that it's important. And for me, the big part was I was providing a rational framework, but not in a sort of emotional framework that people could connect with. And most of our decisions and most of what we do in life is much more emotional than it is rational, even if like I don't want to admit that all the time. So that was like a huge realization for me. So then I went and I read a little bit and did some experimentation on this. And one of the books that I really liked was a book by John Kotter and John Kotter in general has written a ton on how to get people to change. And most of what a vision is just getting people to change, you know, because a company is always going to be going through new iterations. So if people can get comfortable with where they're going and how that change process is going to work, I think it's really, really helpful. So my process for doing a vision was pick a time frame and figure out, okay, am I setting a vision for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Each of those are going to look a little bit different. I framed the vision that we went after at Coursera in both a 3-year time frame and a 1-year time frame. And in a 3-year time frame, the fidelity was much less than in a 1-year time frame. In a 1-year time frame, you can get a little bit more specific about the things that you're trying to do. In a 3-year time frame, it's like, we want to be generally doing these types of things, and we need to transform ourselves in these types of ways. So that was one. But I think you know, how you approach it will vary pretty greatly based on the time frame that you pick. And I think probably the shortest time frame for setting a vision is maybe 6 months or a year. And then the longest is like 5 years. In Coursera, I worked with a bunch of universities. They set like a 50-year vision, which to me just sounds insane. Like, how can anyone know what the hell is going to happen in the next 50 years? So maybe at the very extreme, you can set a vision like that. But that to me seems like ridiculous. So probably anywhere from 1 to 3 years is a reasonable time frame to pick. The second piece is, I think there's a really strong temptation that as the leader, you just go set the vision on your own, and then you come down the mountain with your stone tablets and you say, here it is, this is it, people, go execute it. And I just think that's the wrong way to go about it, for a couple of reasons. So like I made it very collaborative. I involved my direct staff, and we did this on an iterative weekly basis over a time frame where we kind of went through it. I involved my peers at the executive level on a bi-weekly basis where I gave them updates, gave them an ability to have their own input. And there's a couple of reasons why I think making it collaborative is really important. One, making it collaborative will, I think, make it better, because I don't have a monopoly on all the good ideas. So to me, involving other people is a way of trying to get better ideas out of it. Two, by making it collaborative, many people want to feel heard and feel like they have a voice. And that is helpful because the vision has to be enacted by the company. And if the company doesn't have buy-in and they're not feeling that the direction that they're moving is the right one, then it's just not gonna happen. So by making it collaborative, you kind of, one, you front load and get a lot of great ideas. And then two, you're able to start to get buy-in before actually having rolled out the whole vision. I have a couple more points and then I'll pause. I tried to not go super specific. So I did this much more. I picked our user groups. So in the Coursera instance, it's like we had a learner and we had an instructor. The instructor was putting the material out there for learners to learn, and the learner was learning it. So I'm like, for those two groups of people, how do we want the experience to be different in a year? That was basically the framing of it. And then I worked with one of our designers on the team, and they just did sketches for sort of how the experience would look different. And we very much told a visual story instead of a roadmap. So it wasn't a set of features, and it wasn't like, here are the metrics. It was much more of, these two groups of people tell a story about how the experience is going to be better 1 or 3 years from now. And then the last piece I added was, this maybe just for fun, but I think it really helped, was we made it into a bit of a performance. So instead of just me getting up there and delivering a presentation for 45 minutes and talking about it, I actually involved my entire team. And there was a little bit of an element of surprise because we had different characters in this story. And we basically narrated the characters. So they had a journey that they were going through and how it changed over a period of time. And so like people in the audience would narrate, and people didn't expect it. So it was a bit of a performance. And I think all of that really helped because, months later, people were referencing characters from this presentation in their own presentations. So it felt like it really got adopted and became a galvanizing set of material for the whole company.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really interested in the intersection between that sort of data-driven focused execution and the long-term product vision. Did you have a particular approach for translating the 1 and 3 year product vision down to roadmap or OKR levels?
I guess my approach here is we did not do the 1 year planning every month, obviously. So that was like a once a year, update. And so I look at it like we had our best guess of what the 1 year vision and the 3 year vision should be in like December and January. And then we kind of enacted a whole plan, so we took the vision and then we chunked it down into 3 month increments. And we adapted as we went. So we didn't feel like we were beholden totally to every single piece of the vision. There were parts of it that worked and we had empirical evidence that it did, and there were parts that didn't. And we didn't just chase those because we said we thought they were the right things to do. Instead, we updated it. So we were doing a light, like halfway point in the year of, okay, here's what we said, here's what we thought we were going, what have we learned, what's a little bit different, and then kind of set the rest of the year roadmap in place. And then at the end of the year, we do a broader, okay, take stock of, this was where we said we wanted to go for the next 3 years. Is it still right? Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question related to this from the audience. What was the relationship between you and the CEO in terms of defining the vision?
It was, so what I did was I basically said to my CEO, like, hey, I really want to run with this. My team's asking for it. In a lot of ways, the company is manifested through the product. So there are reasons why it makes sense for me as the product leader to run with this, but are you okay with that? And luckily for me, my CEO at the time was like, yeah, that's great, go for it. And then I just said, like, when do you want to be involved? How do you want to be updated? And how should I update and involve the rest of the executive team? So once we kind of nailed that down, we told the rest of the executive team, they all basically said, yep, that sounds good. Then I just ran with it.
Cool.
So I don't think it doesn't always work like that. So I think sometimes it might work that the CEO might actually want to set that vision, and that's totally great. It might work that you have to partner up with another one of the executives on, one of your peers. That's also fine. So I think the main point is setting expectations ahead of time with both your boss, in this case, my boss was the CEO, as well as your peers, because you don't want your peers to feel like you're running away with the sort of the vision for the company and they don't have any way to get an input into it. Because that's gonna spell trouble later when things get implemented. People just won't be bought into it and they'll undermine. So I was very flexible and open to like who wanted to be a part of it and how this went down. And in this case, there was a lot of delegation to me and my team, as long as people felt like they had an ability to give their opinions and be heard.
I have a question about motivation when scaling. One of the key things about motivation is giving ownership. If you have ownership, you're more motivated. That's normal. Can you tell us your experience about your organization, how you get organized to give more ownership to engineers or product teams? Did you use like kind of squads or feature teams organization? And yeah, how did you give ownership and delegate stuff?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that is like hiring great people and giving them lots of responsibility is a core recipe for keeping people very, very motivated. So what I did, I did that. So I tried, like let's just talk about product managers for a second. I was very reluctant to like hire a lot of product managers. And instead I wanted to hire more senior product managers that I could give tons of responsibility to. Because of that exact reason. Like I didn't want to break down the product so small that people felt like they were constantly bumping up against each other and they always had to like align, and there's already enough of that goes on that I didn't want to do more of it. So we organized ourselves into a growth team, and that was probably 10 engineers, a PM, a designer or two, and an analyst. A learning experience team that had some sub teams because there was a lot of surface area to the learning experience for Coursera, but maybe that was 20 engineers and a couple of PMs for that. And then we had a partner experience team. So that's like building all the tools for our content providers. So there's sort of the learner experience, which was broken into growth, and which is getting more people in, and learning experience. And then on the tool side, it's like building out the tools for our partners to upload content. And Netflix had something similar. We had a non-member team, which was sort of like a growth team. We had a member UI. We had an account team. We had someone focused on originals promotion. And each of these, you kind of have some dedicated, a dedicated PM, dedicated engineers, dedicated designers. They are squads. They have a purpose, a swim lane, so to speak, of what they're trying to do. And they have a set of metrics that are complementary but not overlapping with other teams' metrics that they're trying to optimize. And that gave each of those teams enough autonomy for them to set their agenda and a clear indicator of whether or not what they're doing is successful, so that they can start to chart their own path. And I don't feel like, as the leader of those teams, I don't have to come in and like literally make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And instead I can move from that kind of mode to the mode where I'm actually a part of the brainstorming session, and I'm doing some review of the things that they're doing on a bigger scale. So that's the way that I tackled that.
Great, thank you.
How do you see the intersection between mission and vision? I think there's a lot of emphasis now on mission-driven companies, and even companies that have a very tenuous mission try to drive home a mission and core values. Do you think that there needs to be a broader mission and values to go along with a vision, or can they exist independently?
I think they're two different things. Like, I think the mission of Coursera was to make the world's best education available to everyone all over the world. That's not really a vision. The vision was like, we need to become at the point when I was setting all this stuff, we were working deeply on personalization, because now there's like 3,000 courses on Coursera, and we were working on higher stakes learning experiences, because we were starting to take many of the degree programs from our university partners and putting them online. So like the vision was like, we have to go make it an amazing experience in both of those regards for our learners. But the mission is that broader statement that I think doesn't change a lot. That's not like a yearly you go change the mission. If you're doing that, there's problems. So for like Netflix is like, for a long time it was like movie enjoyment made easy was the sort of tagline for the mission. And that really doesn't change. It adapted a little bit because so much of the proposition for Netflix became about TV shows. So it's like, broadly speaking, it's entertainment made like super simple and easy for people. But the vision has adapted and somewhat changed. Like in the beginning of streaming, we did not think, we actually were against originals because we had tried originals when we were a DVD company and it totally failed. Mm-hmm. So it started as a tiny little experiment with this show called Lilyhammer. And then like that worked. And then we made a big bet on House of Cards. And then that worked. And then it became a cornerstone of the vision and the strategy for the company. But the mission of the company hadn't really changed. It was still about entertaining people. And likewise with Coursera, it didn't change, even though you kind of add to the strategy and the vision over time.
That makes sense.
Okay, I have questions about giving feedback at scale. When you scale and you're moving fast, how do you guys give feedbacks, with frequency to engineers? I think it's also a very great lever for motivation, giving feedbacks on things to improve on. And how do you map that on the career path to keep them motivated on the next level?
So I'll talk about both the experiences at Netflix and Coursera because they're different. And I think there's different ways you can attack this. So at Netflix, we strived for a more continuous feedback cycle, where if someone was doing something that you had feedback on, whether positive or constructive, you just went and told them. Instead of saving it for like a yearly review where you wrote this like manifesto that like everyone hates writing them and everyone dreads getting them. So we tried to be much more continuous about it. The other thing that we did at Netflix that I think was interesting is we separated out your performance and your compensation. And like, so we tried to say like, there is a time that we're going to give people feedback, and that feedback should be 360 oriented. And this should be about you improving, not about you getting a raise. That the sort of compensation piece was all market based, and we separated those two things from each other. Most companies don't do that. They do your performance review. That's really the way that you're getting feedback to get better, and that leads into your compensation. Netflix explicitly tried to separate those things so that we could say, you as a coworker at Netflix, how do I give you feedback and get you feedback from your peers that makes you better? And then you as a senior manager, what is your market and how much are you worth? How much would it cost to replace you, and how much would I pay to keep you? Like those types of questions, which are much more economical. And that worked at Netflix. And I think there was a culture that was developed where people gave each other feedback, and it wasn't in a rude, like, I'm going to come blast a bazooka in your face. It was more in a, everyone took it from a spirit of how do I make all of us better? And I think that's really important. So there was trust, among people, that it wasn't coming from a place to try to undermine you. We did, even though it seemed a little bit unstructured at Netflix, we did have a yearly 360 period where basically it was like my ability as a worker there to get a bunch of feedback. It wasn't a way for my manager to collect a bunch of data on me and then filter that down. Like a lot of other companies, you don't see all your raw 360 feedback. At Netflix, I got it all. And actually, I was able to ask people to review me, and I could figure out who I wanted. I could review anyone in the company, and anyone in the company could review me, instead of like my manager going and picking all that stuff. So like, it was a very different model. At Coursera, we were a little more traditional about it. We had a rubric that we used, and it was different levels, and there was descriptions of what those levels are, and we gave people feedback on that. We did have 360s. This was tied to compensation, so we were a little more traditional on it. And I think either can work. What I would say is, I think what you want to strive for is a culture where people trust each other, that feedback isn't about trying to undermine the other person or get the other person fired, but actually the feedback's about trying to improve them and make the company better. And if that's the case, like in a utopia, then you don't need a yearly 360 review, because that's happening on a regular, consistent basis. Now, we don't live in a utopia, so it's like helpful to have that moment where you're like, okay, I should probably think about the last 6 months and how do I want to structure my feedback to these different people. But I think like the ideal is that model where you're able to give really good both positive and constructive feedback to people in a real-time basis. And I guess one last thing I'd emphasize is, I think generally, I'll speak for myself, but I think I can extrapolate out. I'm terrible at giving positive feedback. I'm also terrible at receiving positive feedback. I almost universally feel like if someone is giving me positive feedback, they're not telling me the truth. I just feel like, well, I discount it and I discredit it. And instead, I think like they're just not telling me all the bad stuff because it's mostly negative. And I think like that psychology is pretty pervasive. So I think we need to get better at giving positive feedback when it happens too. Like, hey, that was a really great job. I thought you did amazing, et cetera, et cetera. And the more I think we're able to give that in an authentic way, hopefully we'll be able to accept it in an authentic way, and we won't have my reaction, which is just to assume people are lying.
The funny thing about that too is that when you receive constructive feedback, you dig into it, right? There's value at face, and then when you dig into it, you find some underlying stuff. With positive feedback, at least with me, even when I acknowledge it, I sort of rush through it. I don't dig into it in that same way, and I think we lose a lot of potential value. But just thanks and moving on.
I think that's totally true. I don't know if it's like all of us are two type A personalities or what's happened. We've all been trained in the same way, but it's like, I 100% agree. You move from the positive to like, okay, what's the constructive? And that's the place where I can really dig in. But I think there's a lot to be like, we need praise. Like I know this with my kids. I have kids that are 10 and 8. And if I just gave them all constructive feedback, like their whole self-identity would collapse. And, you know, you need to give them a lot of that a girl, that a boy type of feedback, because it's what starts to build you up and gets you some confidence. And confidence is what you need to be able to make big, bold decisions. And that's kind of what you have to do to survive in the startup game.
Totally. There's a question from the audience. Did you carry over any specific product rituals from Netflix to Coursera, for example, quarterly business reviews or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple. So one at Netflix was, we were just exceptionally data driven. And we probably did well over 1,000 A/B tests. So when I started at Coursera, I was like, we're building an engine for us to be able to test. I wanted the decisions to not just be on a whim, what I thought was the best thing to do. And I also wanted us to be able to debate rigorously, but then be able to try a wide variety of things, not just what I thought was right, but what my team could disagree and go try it. And then I'd get data and learn that I was wrong. And that came exactly from Reed. Like there were many times when he would debate me about a particular feature that I wanted to try and say, he'd be like, that's a dumb idea, but go ahead and try it, you know, because you can test it. And I'd think like, okay, I better work because I probably don't have a bunch of bullets in the chamber. And when it would work, he would say, hey, I told Tom this was stupid. It really worked. Here's what I learned from it. And he would say that in front of like a large group of people. And that's really culture building, where you're building a culture that's going after truth. They're not afraid to have an opinion, but they're able to say, my opinion was wrong, and here's what I've learned. And I think that's super important. And I think A/B testing is a mechanism that really can reinforce that. We also had so I guess a couple of things. So we also had a strategy meeting that happened once a week, where the product managers would set forward the types of things that they're looking to do and then just get feedback on it. We pulled that into Coursera. And then John Doerr was on our board, and John Doerr wrote the book on OKRs. So it was a little bit hard for us to not, implement the OKR process. So we did that, and we experimented a whole bunch with that.
So as you experimented with OKRs, where did you land with your OKR experimentations?
I think one of the most interesting experiments that we did was the teams would plan on a quarterly basis. And we found that even though teams had their own distinct separate swim lanes, there was still tons of interdependencies across all of the different teams. So getting them to align was like a Herculean effort. So what we started doing was like blocking a 2-hour chunk of time during the planning session before the plans were set, but they were far enough along where it was at that point where you're trying to find the intersections. And literally we just brought in all the leaders from the different product teams, put them in a room. There's like 25 people, 30 people, and we had no agenda. It was literally, I kicked it off and said, hey, this is the planning meeting. Here's what we're doing. If you have an item and you have another team as a dependency, and that other team doesn't have it on their OKRs, then you have to delete it from yours. And it was like, okay, 2 hours, go figure it out. And it was just this open session where like it started a little bit awkwardly where people were kind of looking around, and then all of a sudden, they'd look at their list and go find Jerry, tell me about, are you able to do this? And I thought that was a really interesting, non-obvious way to approach it, and not top down at all, but very bottoms up. And it worked really well for us. We definitely kept that tradition going.
I love the idea of forcing the acknowledgement of supporting functions in OKRs. Right. I think a lot of times that ends up either being a invisible assumption, or it's sort of, oh, our team is going to do that, but we're just not going to have an OKR for it. And then you're not actually capturing the work that the team is doing. That's a really cool approach.
Cool.
I think Fabrice is back. Maybe not. Okay. I think one question that sort of gets to the heart of this overall conversation is, how do you know if your team is motivated or at capacity for their motivation?
I think there's a number of things that you can sort of use as a test of this. One will be, if you do any sort of employee pulse survey, or if you just check in with the team, ask how you doing, you're going to hear that pretty quickly. Because when people are not motivated, they're going to be dissatisfied with their job, and they're going to tell you. So I think you can kind of directly ask people and get a pretty clear answer of how things are going. So that's one. Two, I'd say the productivity of the team. So if they say, hey, we're going to do these 5 things, and we're going to improve this metric by X amount, and et cetera, if the activity level just plummets, then there's a big the team's not really motivated, or the team doesn't really know where they're going. And then if they're not able to hit their metrics, that's a little bit trickier. That could be a motivation problem. That could be the metrics were set too high. That could be they tried all the wrong things. So that one's a little bit harder to know if that's really a demotivating thing. That could be motivating. It could have the opposite effect, where they set a very high, they set the expectations super high. They didn't hit them, but they're super motivated to go after it, and they're going to, come, swinging out the next quarter. So that's certainly possible. So I'd probably look for activity level of the team really drops. They're not productive. They're not shipping things. They're not, that kind of stuff, as well as the personal NPS for each of the different employees in a team. When that drops, there's a problem.
What kind of KPIs did you track and follow to see if you're going to reach your 1-year goal or targets? I mean, as CPO, you can't be with all the teams. So what kind of KPIs did you track each day, each week?
We tracked a few different things. So we tracked a more aspirational, are we moving towards our mission type metric, which was essentially number of courses completed, or number of people that have completed a course. And we had some survey data around, people that got new jobs, people that got increase in salary, people that really transformed their lives, because that's at the bottom of what we were trying to do. So we had some aspirational things that were longer term. You couldn't really drive the business by it, but you wanted to make sure that was still happening, and they were very motivating metrics. So that's one set. The other ones are obviously revenue. Revenue for Coursera was sort of a direct translation into did we have the type of impact that we were going after. So that was another big one. And then we did a bunch of employee pulse surveys to understand kind of how the people are feeling. So there was there were aspirational metrics. There were more operational metrics around revenue, course completions, growth? Are we getting enough signups? Like all of these, what's our sign up rate? Like these drove the business on a sort of day-to-day, week-to-week basis. The longer term were these aspirational metrics. And then there were and then there were like measuring employee happiness and productivity. And then we had the sort of strategic initiatives that we were going after. So for instance, we were trying to get many more fully online degree programs onto Coursera. So like we were just able to count, how many do we have? We got 1 right now. Our goal is to have 5. Where are they? And like we could start to manage it at a higher strategic. We didn't know if they were successful yet, but we just needed them first to get them to then, to know if they actually could be successful. And like likewise in Netflix's case, once we shifted strategies towards like that, Netflix was simple. Netflix was retention and acquisition. So we wanted to drive up retention, and we didn't really set KPIs for it. We just said, we want to do tests, A/B tests that make the user experience better as measured through retention. And when we found them, we just rolled them out. And we had acquisition goals of like getting more and more subscribers signed up. So that was pretty simple. Once we made a shift to say we were going after originals, then it became basically, can you spend a lot of money was the goal, which is a fun goal to have, because we had to spend it. We had to spend it on hopefully wise things, but we had to go make bets pretty quickly. I mean, Netflix is now spending $12 billion a year on original content. So in the very, very, very beginning, it was like, Ted, who runs all of that, it was like, hey, Ted, go spend the money. That's what Reed would yell at him.
Great.
I can't imagine having that problem.
Did you try to gamify some developments? Sometimes it's fun to do like developments with gamification to keep squads or people motivated. Do you have any experience like hackathon or gamification or around the specific development? No,
we didn't do a bunch of that. That sounds really interesting and like a potentially interesting approach. My hesitation with that is if people can see right through it, then it can, like, so for instance, like here would be a bad example, I think, of an artificial thing to do to try to motivate a team is to be like, set an artificial deadline. That works like once. And then everyone sees right through it because people went, they worked through the night and then they realized I could have launched it 5 days later and it wouldn't have made a difference. But it was some, PM or business leader who arbitrarily said, we got to ship this right now. So my teams would constantly come back to me and be like, we've picked this deadline. And I'd be like, why are you picking a deadline? I think there's something useful about having a target date for when you're shipping it, but to be and that should be bought in by engineers and the people actually doing the work, because they're the ones that'll suffer to hit that. So I think that's where some of these things could go wrong. But the idea of just like, I don't know what it would look like gamifying. Maybe you have a good idea of it, like leaderboards or, giving people perks for things like.
The only time it worked nice is when doing like bug fighting week or day. We try to gamify between different squads, but it's temporary. I totally agree with you. You can't do that every time. It was a fun way to fix bugs.
And the bug fixing, like you have to find fun ways to get that done. There were a couple of things that we tried. One is just pick a period of time and say, we're going to go knock out a bunch of bugs. Okay. And it's amazing how much satisfaction engineers got from that. That's true. Product managers never really wanted to do it. And the engineers, because they're engineers and designers more than a product manager care about the quality of the product. The product manager cares about like what we're doing next, the strategy, the revenue, like all these other things. But the engineers and the designers are like, I want to build something that I'm proud of. And fixing bugs helps them feel that way. So we would we would get a lot of attention from engineers and designers to go fix bugs. And so I'd have to like force my product managers to do that. I would also celebrate bug fixing, or if someone deprecated a feature, we called this at Netflix scraping a barnacle. So if you think of an analogy of like what you're building through the product is this big ship, and as the ship goes through the ocean, it's going to build up all these barnacles. And as it gets too many barnacles, it's going to slow way down. So we would say like, we need to go scrape some barnacles off the ship, because as we add new features, we want to like free up space to be able to do that. So we don't just slow ourselves way down by having this bloated feature. And like, that is not something that a product manager like wakes up saying, I want to go do. So as a leader, I think you have to find ways to really celebrate those things and call them out in an unusual way, because I think they really, really matter, but it's really hard to measure, and no one will just proactively go do it.
I think that analogy of a barnacle slowing down your velocity is fantastic. I'm going to definitely steal that one. One interesting question from the audience. Do you have any stories of something that was either a failure or near catastrophe?
Near catastrophe. Yeah, so I have multiple. So let me try to do them quickly. One at Netflix was, we were very convinced in sort of the 2010 timeframe. This is when Facebook was still on its ascendancy, and they were, if you remember, they coined this term frictionless sharing. They thought like everything should be shared, and Spotify was growing very quickly based on sharing a whole bunch of songs to Facebook. So we thought like, gosh, there's this existential risk if we don't get on, if we don't make Netflix a more social, viral product, someone else could come build a movie and TV streaming service and grow quickly on the back of Facebook and like eat our lunch. So we were like worried about that from a strategic perspective. So we did a whole bunch of experimentation that I think it was strategically interesting, but not something our members really cared for at all. So it was sort of a disaster, where we were aggressive in like, when people signed up for Netflix in certain countries, we limited it to certain countries just to test it. We forced them to sign up using Facebook. And then when they did, they shared everything they watched to Facebook. And, you know, if you just go ask someone, do you want to do that? They would say, no, I don't want to do that. Maybe I'll select an occasional thing that I want to share. And if you said, do you expect Netflix to work this way? They'd say, no, definitely not. So they didn't want it, nor did they expect it. So like, that's a recipe for things to not work at all. So we eventually rolled all that back. We did give people an ability to share on a selective one-off basis. And even that got rolled back, because you do that like very sparingly. It doesn't happen a whole bunch. So anyway, that was one that it felt like for good strategic reasons we should go after, but actually wasn't. It was kind of a disaster. In the Coursera instance, I just mapped my Netflix experience to Coursera. I was like, wow, we have like 500 courses. And at the time, it was all asynchronous content. So they recorded the content. So there was no reason that it couldn't be available all the time. But the instructor felt like they didn't want to be like the watchmaker who just made a watch and it was out there and everyone used it. They wanted to be active in the course. So they would run, quote unquote, run the course in the spring and the fall. But there was no reason they had to do that. So I was like, why isn't it just on demand? And people should be able to engage in these courses and move through it, whatever, you know, pace they wanted. So you could take it and I could take it, and you could do it in a week and I could do it in 3 months. And it's like Netflix. Well, it turns out learning and entertainment are like exceptionally different from each other. And, you know, the best way to understand this is like, just when is the last time you've said like to anyone, hey, can you stop learning so much? You know, but you say to yourself and others, like, can you stop watching so much TV? You know, TV and Netflix is just a much more addictive behavior than learning is, unfortunately. So when we did that and made it an on-demand experience where people could do it at their pace they wanted, it removed all the urgency. So it went from both important and urgent because I have to do it in this time frame or else it's going to go away, to like, it's important but not urgent. So it moved down my priority list towards the bottom. Many fewer people to actually complete it. So we then moved to a model where it was like train schedule. So like each month there's a start date and an end date. And we learned that all those things really matter for education, whereas they don't matter for entertainment. So that was, it started out as a bit of a disaster and then we saved it. So, so like the kernel of the idea of the content should be available was the right one. It was really about finding the right implementation for that.
Hey, I'm back. And you know why I'm back? So we are out of time, and so much things that we could learn from you, Tom. It was really great. So thank you so much, Justin. Thank you so much, Fabrice. And of course, thank you so much, Tom. We learned a lot about setting the vision, about Tom and the CEO, about motivation, about mission, about feedback, about product rituals, about OKR, about how do you know if your team is motivated, about KPI you track. Like we talked about a lot of different things and we learned a lot in only 1 hour. So for those who are curious, this is exactly what we do at Plato. We are helping you learn from the best engineering and product leaders in the world. We are launching something new that we call the tracks. Tracks are exactly those kind of group sessions where there is one mentor and 5 or 6 other people who are asking questions about a certain topic. For example, building diverse and inclusive team, for example, growing as an experienced engineering leader, foundation of a great product manager. Tom is probably somewhere here. So this is a series of sessions that we bundled together that happen once every other week or once every week. Something that you can subscribe to a bit to learn about engineering and product leadership with the best mentors. So we are going to share with you a link. It's $99 a month, so it's like something new that we're launching, so it's really cheap for now. So if you want to try it out, like it's going to be available for today and tomorrow. So we're going to send an email. In any case, we are going to do more of those community AMAs. We're gonna have the co-founder and CTO of Datadog pretty soon. We are going to have the CTO of Reddit pretty soon. I'm working to have the CTO of Stripe. I'm also working to have the SVP engineering at GitHub. So we are going to have plenty of great ones, and we are going to offer these opportunities to some mentors who are spending time every single week in the platform to help others, to interview them and to learn from them, and hopefully it will be beneficial for many others too. So thanks again for your time, and thanks for your wisdom and for your questions, for your curiosity, and for everything. And see you all again next time for this community.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Great
Tom.
questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Guys. Yeah.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.